everyone, welcome to another episode of The Real Estate Path. I'm your host, Jim Lee, and I'm super excited for you guys to be here with us. The podcast is all about an investor's journey, not just the highlight reel, but the real, raw path that a real estate investor must take in order to achieve their vision. Whether you are a first-time real estate investor or a seasoned pro, we're here to talk about the success, wins, losses, the lessons behind every real estate deal and in every real estate journey. Today, I have a very special guest, Devon. Welcome to the show, Devon.
Thank you.
So Devon and I met at one of the real estate meetup. It's called Phoebe San Fernando. Phoebe stands for investor by investor. And at the time when we met, he showed the interest that he would like to speak and educate the world about pad splitting. I figured this is a hot topic right now, especially to combat with affordability issue. Co-living, pad splitting is a very, very popular thing, and it also helps real estate investor generate passive income with different strategies. So wanted to get started with Devon. So Devon, why do you think all of a sudden this pad splitting became so hot? And tell me a little bit about, I guess, start with your background and context into how you got into PadSplit.
Yeah, so I've been in the real estate industry for going on 12 years now. Started off in the title insurance space, was doing that for about 6 or 7 years, and then once COVID hit, kind of went into more in the prop tech space. I went full remote at that point and might as well work for a technology company. Worked for a company called Homelight for a little while, and then did a short stint as doing mortgage loans, like second mortgages for a startup that was doing that type of thing. And then now working for PadSplit. And so, I also have my broker's license, but I don't actually do any real estate transactions. It just happened along the way. But back to your question of why PadSplit is, so such a hot topic right now. I think it just all goes to the affordable housing crisis. People are struggling to live anywhere. And so, and especially in the major metros, it's hard to get like even a one-bedroom apartment, studio apartment. So that's where PadSplit kind of comes in. It helps with that. And it has like two aspects to it. It helps investors make extra money while also solving the affordable housing crisis.
Right, sweet. So let's talk a little bit about, if I was a first-time investor and I was getting into pad splitting, if I showed some interest, I'm like, okay, this makes sense to me. Where do I start? Because there's definitely some rules, regulation that you need to follow, right? Especially in different markets, different city, different regulation and all that. You cannot just convert any house in however you want and start renting as many rooms as you like. Yeah, so where do I start? Where do I start to do research? Where do I start to look into markets that could potentially work?
Yeah, obviously chatting with someone like me, right? So I'm the market manager for the LA area, but I also help investors invest out of state as well. So I can help an investor invest in Atlanta, which was our first market, Phoenix, Vegas, anywhere in the United States pretty much. But there's certain things that we recommend to look at when you're first examining like whether you want to do a pad split. And that's doing your due diligence, right? It's just like any other investment. A lot of people will think it's like a guaranteed thing or something like that. But just like any other real estate investment, you can't just buy anything and turn it into something else. You need to do your research, make sure that it's a good fit for you. So what I usually recommend is like if it's your first time, looking to buy a pad split, I'd probably buy it closer to your own where you live, just because most of our hosts, when they manage just one property or their first property, they're going to self-manage, right? It's hard to make the case for a property manager at that point. But if cost of acquisition is the most important thing. Sometimes LA doesn't work for that, right? So we do have some people who their first investment is in Atlanta or in Charlotte. And we have some property managers that can help them with that. But, I have a buy box that I share with anybody who chats with me. What you're really looking for is, analyzing what the cost is going to be to rehab the property. That's going to be a huge expense when you're looking to purchase the property and acquire it. So whether that's bringing it back up to normal living conditions, if it's like a really rundown property, or just doing renovations to add more bedrooms. That's what you want to look for. Do the financial analysis on that aspect of things, and then also make sure it has enough square footage to really make it make sense. Also look at what local rents are going for. So similar to like any other real estate deal, you want to look at the local market and see what the conditions are like.
Okay. So what are you seeing out here in LA? Because it's difficult to make real estate investing work in LA, especially with the tenant-friendly state, being a tenant-friendly state, landmine regulation, rent control, all that stuff that you basically have to be mindful of, right? So in terms of doing pad splitting in LA, what are some of the challenges that you've seen, you come across, and what are the benefits that you've seen by investing here?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, even when I took this job at PadSplit, I was like, is this really going to work out here in LA, right? You know, everybody thinks the same thing. But it is just like any other market where there are certain conditions, essentially, that you want to make sure are satisfied when you're looking to invest, right? Buying a 1,100 square foot house and trying to make it work on PadSplit can be a little tough because you just don't have that extra square footage to convert into an extra room. But we do have some investors who they put an ADU in the back, right? And with the new ADU regulations, it gives you a lot more options, right? And so maybe instead of leasing that separate ADU out in a long-term rental, you can, if you can build a big enough ADU, now instead of 1 3-bedroom house, you have 2 3-bedroom houses essentially, and you can rent those out by the room and increase your cash flow. So similar challenges you're gonna see are gonna be to the standard rental, investment real estate. It is a landlord-friendly state, or a tenant-friendly state at the end of the day, but we have certain mitigation strategies that we use and that we help our hosts employ in order to make sure that you don't face as much risk as far as financial loss as you do with like a normal long-term rental, right? So even if you have like a normal 4-bedroom house, right, and you rent that out on a 12-month lease, if the person starts squatting, stops making their payments, stops paying rent, and they want to go through the entire eviction process, out here, what does it take? Like 6 months, at least bare minimum, to get somebody out if they really don't want to go. You're out of 6 months worth of revenue on that property. With the PadSplit model, even if you only have 4 bedrooms, which a lot of times we encourage to add another bedroom or even 2, depending on the size of the property, you're now having 4 streams of income. So if one person stops paying, you're still receiving income from 3 other tenants in the property while you're working on the eviction on that fourth tenant. So there's that challenge, but it's like I said, it's a little bit less than with a long-term rental. And as far as benefits, most of the time, most of our hosts see extra cash flow compared to what they were seeing on a standard long-term rental. Especially when you get into the larger bedroom size houses, get to the 5-6 bedrooms in a house, it's harder to rent something like that. You have longer vacancy periods. And then on top of that, there's just a smaller pool of people who want that size of property, right? A 1-bedroom apartment, that's just going to fly all the time. But a larger house with more bedrooms, each bedroom doesn't scale the rental income that you can receive on the property the same way that, with a PadSplit it does. A 4-bedroom house in a certain location might get $4,000 a month in rent. A 5-bedroom might get you $4,600, right? And then if you were to do it on PadSplit, each room might be worth $1,000. So every room that you add adds another $1,000 in revenue. And that's just a random example, right? It depends on the zip code and what the local comps are getting. But that's so far what I've seen with a lot of hosts is once you start adding those rooms, it really significantly increases that cash flow, especially at the 5-6 bedroom mark.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I look at it, more money means more problem. So going back to what you said earlier, is that when you are managing this house, converting this house into multiple bedrooms, right, here in LA, you still have to go through permitting process and all that. And, that can get 3 to 6 months or even 12 months, depending on what area you're looking to do something like that. So that rule still applies in Los Angeles, right? That's still a risk. But on top of that, I was just thinking, earlier when you said about tenants, evicting tenants, right? Okay, evicting one tenant is a hassle, you mentioned. Now, let's just say if you have a room full, like 6 rooms, and you have one tenant you need to evict. It's a horrible tenant. It's making the whole place not livable because whatever the case, the tenant smells, she doesn't shower. I don't know what the case might be. And you're trying to evict that tenant, but the tenant's not going to go. Wouldn't that ruin your whole project? Like, wouldn't that just drive the other tenants to move out in that scenario? Have you come across something like that? Not in LA. There have been times on our nationwide platform that, we have, I think, just shy of 22,000 rooms for rent on the platform right now. In 22,000 rooms, you have some bad apples, right? So, and I think we've housed 50,000 members at this point. We call our tenants members. So 50,000 people housed. We've had some evictions, right? And
our eviction rate is actually 1.2%, so it's super low for, in the industry. But when it comes to like ruining the house for everyone, there is that potential. But at the end of the day, we find that most of our members actually just leave if they're going to fall behind on payments or something like that, because they don't bring in their own furniture. They're very low impact in what they bring with them. So, the rooms are furnished when you set up a PadSplit. So they aren't coming in like a whole family that might want to be in a house, settle in. They might have been there for 2-3 years. Our average stay on the platform is about 8 to 9 months currently. So this isn't really like short term, but it's not super long term either. There are some members who stay long term as well, but that's kind of the average. And so if something like that does happen, what we've seen is the best case scenario is just doing like a cash for keys situation. And even out here, some of the rooms we have on our platform right now, they're going for about $1,200 a month, a little plus or minus on that. That person is going to be much more motivated by $2,000 or $3,000 than a person renting that whole property for $5,000. Because you give somebody like that $2,000, that's a week's worth of hotel rooms, right? Mm-hmm. That's a lot of options. Versus, the $4,000 or $5,000, you try to give a family $5,000, they're like, this isn't going to do anything for me. So there's that. But then on top of that, our members are banned from our platform if they do go through an eviction in a PadSplit. So a lot of our members, this is like one of their only options for affordable housing. And so they're motivated to stay on the platform. So, rather than go through that and be perma-banned from the platform, they'd much rather just leave. And we do see that. We'll see like, somebody's like, I'm going to miss rent on Monday, they'll be gone on Sunday. And, sometimes that happens. And, you now have to search for a new person, but it's better than having to evict them and go through all that process, the legal costs and everything like that. We'd much rather have you have 1 week of vacancy than 6 months of eviction, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we've seen.
I see. But that's pretty amazing what you shared. The data is 1.2% turnover. How do you guys manage to keep such a low turnover? And also, what type of demographics do you guys target? Do you guys have like an agency firm, a business, government that sends you these type of affordability tenant, whether it's housing for workforce, military, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, our membership base is all over the place, right? It's anybody that's looking for housing. And sometimes when we talk about the affordable housing crisis and these being affordable housing units, some people think that the people that we're housing are like no-income homeless people. And that's not really what it is. For the most part, I mean, we do income verification. People have to have income in order to rent these units. So, these people are working. They're everyday people, hotel workers.
Do you guys take Section 8?
No.
Okay.
Only because the payback period is so long for us to negotiate that.
Yeah.
And then also, especially right now, Section 8 looks like it's going to get its budget cut significantly. So we actually have a lot of hosts that are coming to us from Section 8 want to get off that. But I get it. It's a totally different investment strategy. And at the end of the day, like when I consult with someone, I say, I'll be honest with you and tell you if it's going to work for you or not. And like there's plenty of times where I talk to someone and the numbers just don't work, and it's okay. We're not sitting here forcing people to do PadSplits. You know what I mean? But these people are just working people. Uber drivers, airport workers, like I said, bartenders, actors in LA, right? Anybody who's just looking for some place to live. And that's one of the things that when I first started at PadSplit, I thought the same thing. Like, who's going to want to live in a shared room? But really, it's happening all the time around us. Yeah. You know what I mean? I shared a room at a certain point. Actually, I shared a room with another person in the room with me in college. And so I was renting a bed essentially at that point, which you don't do that, by the way. Some people have asked, they're like, can I just rent it out by the bed? And I'm like, no, that's more of a dorm. We're not doing that.
That's how Airbnb started.
Yeah.
The founders slept on the couch and then they rented a space on the couch.
So, I mean, this is happening all the time. I think it's hard to put yourself in these people's shoes sometimes, unless you're already there. Like for me, I have a family. I could never live in the PadSplit because I have too many people. I have 3 little kids. So, to be like, how can I just share a room with all these different people? It doesn't make sense for me. But then I've talked to members and I've seen stories. We have testimonials on our website where you can check them out, where these people, it's changing their lives because otherwise they'd be living in their car because they just can't afford the rent. Or, even in LA, you might have somebody making $80,000 a year, $70,000 a year, can't afford to rent an apartment. With all the qualifications, you have to, 3 months rent, a security deposit. Then on top of that, you have furnishing costs, utilities, all that type of stuff that has a high barrier to entry for these people. Yeah. So that's kind of what the membership demographic is. And some of these people, like I talked to a host at another panel of ours that we had, where he's had the same member in his property for 3 years, I think, 2 or 3 years now. And the person is he's like in his mid 40s, just goes to work, comes home, likes to play video games, and that's it. That's what his day is. So, he doesn't really care. He's just trying to go for the minimal impact as far as like what it's going to cost him to live.
So you brought up a good point. So why does the turnover would be 8 to 9 months? Wouldn't these people stay longer, or are they just typically just okay? I need a temporary space for now until I can get back on my feet again, and then I'll move out.
And there's all sorts of reasons that we see that. So our minimum commitment to the platform is 12 weeks. So that kind of helps with like short-term rental municipality regulations.
Yeah.
So instead of having to get like licensing and stuff like that, most cities, it's 29 days. 29 days or less, you have to get an Airbnb license essentially. So we're more in that midterm space, mid to long term. But when it comes to what their time of stay is going to be, their tenure in the property, it just depends on what their individual situation is, right? So we have some people that are on contract work. They're like, I have a 3-month contract here, traveling nurse. Traveling nurses make a lot of money though, so maybe they might get something different. But, there's all sorts of people who are like, hey, I want to just have the bare minimum as far as like rental expenses, because maybe I'm saving up to buy a house. Think about trying to save up to buy a house in LA. You're already paying $2,400 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. And with your income, depending on where that's at, trying to put together another $400 or $500 a month towards a down payment, it's hard. So that's where this, pad splitting and living in a pad split can help you with that. Because now you might be able to say, like, okay, I can step down to even a $1,300 or $1,400 room, which I would have done with a friend of mine maybe anyway, but I can't find anybody to do it with me. Now they can do that, save that. So that's, at the end of the day, we consider ourselves like a vehicle for financial empowerment. And so it helps people not only get back on their feet, like you mentioned, but also people just that are like, hey, I want to invest in real estate. I want to buy my own house. They can kind of take a step back, slow down their outflow, and help, build up some reserves, essentially. Yeah,
it's a great way to save some money. I remember instead of going straight to a 4-year college, I went to community college first to save money. So that essentially that's the same concept, right? It gives people option.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really, at the end of the day, too, like we talk about this affordable housing crisis. There's so much untapped square footage in most single-family homes out there that if we could actually efficiently allocate the rooms that are built currently, we could house everyone in America, right? But it's there's so many houses that we have two rooms that aren't used, or there's storage rooms, things like that. And so this model helps people to either right now we actually just launched an owner-occupied model, where you can actually live in the property and essentially like house hack, but now you use our network and our marketing to fill those rooms for you, and our vetting, because we do screenings for our members, background check, income verification, credit check. And so now you can have somebody in the house that you don't have to then run your own credit check or run your own background check, which most homeowners aren't going to have access to that just to do really quickly, right? Unless they're working with like a property manager or something. But you have that access, that tool essentially to house hack. So that's something new that we're doing as well.
That's really cool. Do you guys also help manage the tenant, or is it just the owner that's own? Once you find the tenant, that's it.
Yeah, so it depends on the situation. If you're doing the owner occupied, you're probably going to end up managing a lot more because you're there.
Sure.
But in our standard model, where like the host doesn't live in the property, we do have some member management where we have an app that the members can communicate with each other. And it's all documented, so if anything arises, it's all written down. They can communicate directly with the host, or we also have a 24/7 support line where the members can reach out to them if there's any issues with their payments, or if they're having issues with another member. We have a whole triage team that has a lot of processes. We've been doing this for like 6 or 7 years now, so we have a pretty deep roster of people that are experiencing like managing disputes and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if something does need to be escalated, we do pass that on to the host.
How long has this co-living concept been around? Because I know in Asia, this has always been, since I was born, even before, because we do co-living, micro apartments, living out there, because it's very very dense out there. But for the concept to get here, how long has it been? Do you know?
Yeah, in all honesty, we didn't invent co-living, right? So co-living's been around for thousands of years, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We're just really just turning it into a network essentially, so that way we can scale it and people can be able to cash flow from it versus
Sure.
like having it one-off and small units. It becomes more legitimate when it's on a service like ours.
Yeah.
And when a member is looking for a room for rent, finding it on a marketplace like ours, gives it a little brand legitimacy, right? But I mean, I wouldn't know. I think co-living's probably been around since the Stone Ages, and it's probably since the beginning of America. There's probably been people sharing rooms, right?
Yeah.
And sharing houses for sure.
Yeah, it's just interesting that why it all of a sudden blew up in this market, especially pandemic, right? After the affordability crisis, that's when things started to kick off. And
I think there's 2 points to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not only is it hard for people to afford to live and rent something, but then on top of that, it's hard for investors to make money right now. Back during the 2% interest rates, you could do whatever you wanted. You cash flow by bumping into a wall. Like, it was super easy, right? Not to say that that's true. It still took some work, but it was a lot easier to make things work. And now in this economic environment that we're in, it's harder to find a good investment that cash flows. I do a lot of speaking events in LA, and every time I ask the question, I say, who out here has purchased a property in the last 2 years that has had a positive cash flow? And it's tough. Very few people raise their hand for that question. It's kind of a loaded question also because I'm about to talk about that. It is tough to make a property cash flow. And so this is a model that I think excites a lot of investors because it helps them expand their horizon. You might be looking at certain deals a certain way all the time. This is my buy box. This is what I'll do. This is what I know. And now, by seeing that there's options for more cash flow, more revenue out of a property, you can expand that buy box a little bit.
Yeah.
And so now you're competing for deals that, when you're going through your traditional buy box, a lot of people, there's a lot of competition, right? It's like, oh, this is a super, low value property. You're going to have 900 people calling that owner trying to get that, that property sold. Now you have that slightly expanded buy box, and there's a lot more opportunity on the fringes that nobody else is looking at. So I've actually talked to some investors, and they're like, I share our buy box, talked about what we do, share them the comps of what in certain neighborhoods, and they'll tell me, they're like, don't tell anybody about this. Like, I want to be the only one looking for these because otherwise everybody's going to want to buy these properties before I can get a chance at them. But that's not what I do. I have to spread the good word of PadSplit.
Keep all the secrets to myself. So I wanted to ask you. You mentioned earlier to do PadSplit, do it in your backyard. Start with your backyard so you can manage it, right? What about people that are now looking out of state to invest, right? Which they're able to mitigate risk and also low barrier cost to entry. How does that compare to the LA market? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so we have, in my talks with people every day, I go through that same exact conversation. It's like, okay, well, I want to buy a PadSplit. Where do I start? And I'm like, well, yeah, if you're looking at LA, what's your minimum? Like, you're probably going to be at least $700,000 for a suitable property, at least, right? If you go out to Hemet, maybe, but there's with less risk. There's less risk, but also less profit, right? It's the same thing as any other real estate. But we have several options for someone who's looking to get started and maybe just doesn't want to jump all in California. We actually have an online marketplace on our website where people can list active filled PadSplits for sale, and that's throughout the whole country. But obviously in Atlanta, where we started, we have 7,300 rooms for rent in Atlanta. We have a lot of properties there that have been active as a PadSplit for 3, 4, 5 years now, and those properties, when they go for sale, actually sell at a little bit of a premium compared to what the property would sell for as a traditional single family residence. However, obviously as an investor, you're going to pay a little premium on it as well because it's already set up and running as a business. So now when you're analyzing your deal, your cash flow and your profit margin might not be as high as what you could build for yourself, but it's less risk. So we have that. And we actually build out a vendor network in every market that we're in, where we put together rock solid property managers that are comfortable with doing PadSplits. Because if we talk to a certain property manager and they only do long-term rentals, traditional style, they're not going to want to deal with PadSplit just because they don't know it. It's actually a lot easier for them because, especially compared to an Airbnb. But it creates a little bit more revenue opportunity for them as a property manager to do a PadSplit versus a long-term rental. But I won't get into the specifics of that. We have general contractors in each market that we have that have done PadSplits, and you can actually see on our website how many projects they've done. So if you're looking in Atlanta, right, we have a realtor in Atlanta that's done over 100 PadSplits for people. So hey, I have this amount of capital I want to deploy in Atlanta, for instance. You go on our website, you check out whichever realtor you want to use. that realtor obviously is a rock star out there. You talk to him, he can find you, he knows exactly what to look for when shopping for a split. And that's kind of what we do every day in every market as market managers out here. I talk to realtors, I talk to property managers, I talk to general contractors, all the different vendors that would help build this market up and recreate essentially what we've done in the other markets. So there's a lot of opportunities in the different markets out there for people that are looking to invest out of state. And even if you want to do your own project and not necessarily buy something fully ramped and ready to go, there's options for that. And like I said, you can talk to somebody local, so you don't even have to talk to somebody who's national. You can talk to somebody who's in that market, who feels the pulse, who knows where the good properties are, and probably has even worked on building a PadSplit either for themselves or somebody else previously.
Yeah. So you touch upon something that you said you didn't want to talk more into it. I actually wouldn't mind to explore that, which is property management. How do they make their money? Because I know when it comes to short-term rental property management, they charge a hefty price, right? 25%, 30%, depending on who you decide to hire. But what about pad splitting? How much do they charge? What are the challenges for them, on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so when you're comparing like just three strategies, right? Long-term rental, mid-term rental, short-term rental, and we kind of are falling in that mid-term rental space. Short-term rental has a lot of work to be done for a property manager. So that's why usually you do see that higher premium charged by the managers. You might have a weekend stay, and then they got to do a turnover. And then a two-night stay somewhere else, a turnover, right? And then there's constantly dealing with turnovers and issues and people partying in Airbnbs, breaking things, having to replace things, having to maintain furniture, all that type of stuff. So that's why usually we do see like property managers in the short-term space are the most expensive. And then long-term, especially out here in Southern California, there's a lot of realtors who will do it for you, and it's low lift for them. They just charge, a couple percentage points on the rent, or maybe a flat fee of like $100 to $200 a month as part of their services, but they're doing nothing, right? Really. They're doing stuff, but they're doing not nearly as much as the short-term rental crowd. And so they're just really responding to maintenance requests from tenants, and then maybe if the property goes vacant, you have to fill that room for them. And then even then, a lot of times they'll charge like a full month's rent for that, to do that service. Oh. So a lot of our property managers that we work with tend to fall in the middle. They're a lot cheaper than short-term rental and might be a little bit more expensive than your absolute cheap long-term rental property manager. And we do a lot of the work for them. So where a lot of property managers, the big bulk of the hard part of their job, from what they've told me, is finding the tenants, right? And we do that for them. We market the property out and we fill the rooms for our hosts, so they don't have to do that. Some of our property managers, so our system is actually really well integrated to work with property managers. So our hosts have an online portal where they can manage the communication with the tenants and things like that. And they can actually add in a property manager right into their portal that can kind of see everything that they're seeing, whether it's maintenance requests, chats, all that type of stuff, payment history. And then they can also do additional screening questions. Because we do have a lot of hosts that do additional screening beyond what we do, especially out here in LA, because people are worried about, eviction or something like that. So they're like, I want to see these pay stubs for myself, stuff like that. So a property manager for a PadSplit doesn't have to find the tenants, doesn't have to do as much screening, doesn't have to worry about running a credit check, doesn't have to do a whole application or anything like that. A lot of our hosts, what they'll do is let a property manager get a picture of the ID with the face, send that over, and maybe your two most recent pay stubs, just to kind of verify what we've already checked and prevent fraud, right? So that's kind of what we've seen as far as the amount of work that they've had to do. Now, as far as like managing local vendors, like plumbers, maintenance people, that type of stuff, there's still that aspect. But a lot of these people, like I said before, this is one of their only options for affordable housing. So they want to keep these places nice, right? They're not going to, and then they're just not going to want to really damage these as much as maybe somebody who's unattended for 2 years in a long-term rental. They keep up with it. And then a lot of times we recommend also to have like a monthly cleaning come in for like the common areas, just so that way you have another set of eyeballs on the property. But as far as like the property management, yeah, I'd say it's like right in the middle of that, very minimal amount of day-to-day operations and way less than the short-term rental space for sure.
Right. Would you guys consider splitting as midterm rental?
Yeah, we call it a midterm to long-term strategy because, like I said, the bookings are open-ended. So, and this is where when I talk to a host, I'm saying, if you're concerned about that, about having a potential long-term tenant, have a conversation with them. What's your exit strategy? Why are you booking this property? You can definitely do that when somebody requests a booking on your property. You can say, hey, are you looking to stay for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, forever? But a lot of people are looking at these rooms as essentially like an apartment. It's a place to live, and until something else changes, whether my job changes or something else with the house or I find something better, I'm going to be here. So that's where that average has kind of stretched out a little bit more into where it is more in that midterm space. Yeah, I'd say you get, the reason why it averages out to that 8 to 9 months is you do get those long-time tenants that have been there 2-3 years, but you also get a lot of people who do like the minimum 3 or 4 months. And then as we grow as a company and have been doing this longer, that data will also probably change because now you have a lot more people that have lived in the PadSplit for 4 or 5 years versus at this point, that same property might only have been on the platform for 2 years. So that data will change, but definitely midterm for sure.
When I first discovered the company PadSplit, it was Relentless of last year. Relentless conference, I think it's in...
We go to a lot of conferences.
Yeah, so that's when I first discovered. That's also, I think, the second time I met Pace Morby. But at the time, I wasn't too familiar with PadSplitting until I joined his mastermind group, which, you know, everyone in his program is doing PadSplitting, co-living, and RV parks. So talk a little bit about that, you know, because I know you briefly mentioned before this show is that you are very involved, PadSplit is very involved with Pace's community. How did you guys get into it? And was it they seeked you guys out, or how were you guys able to create that win-win partnership?
I'm not in charge of that partnership, so I'm not super familiar with the details, but I do know Pace has been a great partner of ours.
Yeah.
And I do know that their community has been very welcoming of ours. You know, when we launch in a new market, we usually have a lot of the sub-2 community that reaches out to us, wanting us to come to events, talk to investors, because they've already talked about doing co-living. They just didn't have somebody local to talk about it with. You know, I've done presentations at sub-2 events. And I think, to be honest, the reason why that community has worked so well with us is because it's something different, right? You know, the traditional, you buy an investment property with a conventional loan and then you rent it out long term, that isn't necessarily the model for everyone, or you buy property cash. And so the sub-2 community, because it's more focused on creative finance, is also focused on creative ways to make more money and create more leverage out of a property. So that's where I think that we've kind of gone hand in hand with them. You know, we are a newer model. You know, people sometimes are like, oh, I don't know, I've never heard of that, so I don't want to do it, right? Yeah. Same thing with sub-2. You know, people are like, I've never heard of doing a sub-2 deal, I don't want to do it. Yeah. But, you know, it works, you know, you just have to find the right deal. And the same thing with PadSplit.
Yeah, now you can combine PadSplit with sub-2.
And that's the thing. We have a lot of sub-2 investors on our platform, you know, that are, that's actually a great way to start Split because now you're coming into it for less down, you know, usually better terms than the traditional purchase, and you have even more room for extra cash flow.
Yeah. Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience that we haven't covered yet?
I think we've touched on most of everything. You know, if I always tell people if they're interested, feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure you can message Jim. You know, we can chat about LA or any other market.
Yeah, how can people find out more about you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I'm all over the place. You know, I try to cast a wide net. So I'm always meeting people. I go to a lot of events. So feel free to reach out. Devon Aguirre on social media. Or my Instagram, Devon needs an Insta. But don't judge me. Don't do an Instagram audit on me because I'm terrible at that. So I keep begging my wife to take over my Instagram account. I'm like, just do it for me, start posting, you know, because she's so much better at it than I am.
Well, you just need to hire someone like Pedro, you know, because you get it started. But yeah, thank you for being on the show. That concludes this episode of The Real Estate Path. I'll see you guys next time.